Yeah, yeah. I believe that we are live. Okay, David, how are you doing today?
I am okay. I'm still with us. It's alive, as Gene Wilder would say.
It's, yeah. Should I
YouTube says
chime in
still
now
waiting
with
on
Frau
you.
Blucher?
Oh, there we go. Perfect. No, yes,
Perfect.
yes. Okay. Yes, YouTube
I
has
think we're
started
good.
now.
Okay, okay.
You're good.
So
Sorry.
yeah, there's about a 30-second delay in there. So anyway, how you doing, Allison?
I am good. Hanging in there.
Good.
Enjoying the last nice day before it freezes again.
Uh, I'm jealous. I will say I'm jealous. We're frying our
I
anyway.
will trade with you any day you
Anyway,
want.
so you guys are going to be included in the big snowstorm that's supposed to blow through that part of the world,
It's
or
not supposed to snow a whole lot, but it's supposed to freeze. So
okay,
at least
all
I'm
right,
getting frost warnings. So it's
all
like,
right,
60 degrees today, and then there's a frost warning up at the top.
yeah, yeah. I've actually several people have commented about that, and it's I actually have sent out several links to the piece that I wrote for astronomy talking about what was it? I forget what it was called, but the one talking about the circulation patterns and how they affect slow mode Rossby waves and
Yep.
all of that kind of stuff. I sent it to one friend who was talking about this, and I said, actually, I wrote a piece talking about this, to which he responded, "Of course you did." Anyway, so what's in the news that's of interest?
A lot. I've honestly stopped looking at the news more than 2 or 3 times a day. I can't take it. So I kind of read it in the morning and then I read it in the evening. But I mean, it's kind of same old, same old. Everybody's opening too early and we're
Yeah.
concerned about this,
Yeah.
which, was a concern.
And now we've got the political polarization moving out into actions here. So we've got
Yeah.
two Americas acting in completely different ways again
Yeah.
now. And we're about to see the results of it.
Yeah. So there was an article, an opinion piece in the Atlantic. I don't recall. Anyway, within the last few days, they just came out and said that the United States is a failed state. That if you look at our response to this, it shows that we have lost the ability to actually, we're responding to this thing like we were Paraguay or somebody, as opposed to what we should actually be. And yeah, and as always, trying to take down science is at the core of that. I mean, I remain convinced the United States was originally a product of the Age of Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have patron saints, and those patron saints are folk from the Enlightenment. And the further we have strayed from that, the more we have said, oh, we're not going to listen to science because that's an uncomfortable thing for us to have to do, the worse things have gotten. And so now we find ourselves here at this point that we're facing the worst global pandemic in a century, and people still can't figure out that scientists are actually who they ought to be listening to through this thing.
And it's really interesting that you mentioned that, Jeff, because we think of our founding politicians as some people think of them as saints or larger than life personalities. A lot of people think of many of them as not terribly erudite or educated or articulate people. Washington is often thought of as primarily, well, a straightforward soldier, but they all actually were educated in the Age of Enlightenment. And most all of them had read and were familiar not only with the content, but the philosophy of reasoning of Newton, of the Principia. This is what they thought was the scientific analytical method was how you devolved thought into government.
Yeah.
We certainly here right now in this day and age.
Yeah. And they were all, or at least many of them, were, of course, you didn't call them scientists at the time, you called them
No,
natural philosophers, but
right.
certainly Jefferson very much considered himself to be a scientist. Ben Franklin
Mhm.
very much was a scientist, and
Absolutely.
on down the line. And
Absolutely.
so the idea, yeah, you hear the bastardizations of what the founders were like that you run across so often at this point. And it's, you would love to be able to bring somebody like Ben Franklin forward to today, let him look at what was going on, and then just sit back and listen to him respond. And given Franklin's reputation for his ability to turn a wicked phrase, I suspect that the rants that he would give rise to, looking at what the United States has become today, um, might even turn our ears red. I don't know.
He probably would, it would boil down to what in the holy hell happened while I was asleep for a couple of centuries. But he certainly was a genius. He was
Mhm.
the most famous American by an order of magnitude in the world at the time of the Revolution.
Yeah.
Jefferson was a genius and a tinkerer and inventor and a scientist as well,
Mhm.
and a polymath.
Yep.
And even the ones who were not so much, like Jefferson and Franklin, the two geniuses of the founding fathers, quote unquote.
Mhm.
Madison, the little, bookish, ill,
Mhm.
sickly, short student at Princeton, and Adams too, this straightforward, principled Boston attorney. They were all educated in the scientific method, which does not happen any longer today in American schools.
No, it doesn't. It absolutely does not.
So they would be shocked.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they would be shocked. What was, who was it? Was it, this that was asked, what form of government have we been given? And the answer was a republic if you can keep it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's,
Franklin, I think it was, and of course Franklin had so many good saying,
oh
of
man, yeah.
hanging together will all hang separately and right on down the line.
Yep. Yep.
The only thing we rightly didn't listen to Franklin about, some have claimed, was to make the turkey the national symbol.
Oh, I don't know. I think that he was
I mean,
spot
they're
on.
delicious. Just saying.
Well, also, yeah. Yeah, I could imagine that. But yeah, yeah, Franklin, you get the idea that Franklin not only would have been somebody fun to sit around and talk to,
Oh my
but
God.
that Franklin would have been some fun to party with.
Absolutely. Oh, well,
Probably.
Franklin was a naughty boy
Oh,
as,
yes, he was.
and
Yeah.
he had a separate European family that nobody knew about, and
Hmm.
parents and all kinds of things. And
Yep.
he knew how to party. So
Yep.
he
Yep.
was a genius, but he was also like to have a good time.
Yeah. 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 If he were around today, he would be doing something like we're doing, only far better. Yeah.
Well, he was the mentor who Jefferson and the others looked up to, the old wise,
Hmm.
for advice. And
Yeah.
remember what John Kennedy said about Thomas Jefferson when there were, what, about 24 Nobel laureates in the East Room at the White House. And
Hmm.
John Kennedy said, this is the greatest collection of intelligence, wit, and wisdom in the White House in the United States since Thomas Jefferson dined here alone.
Indeed, indeed. So yeah, it would be,
Digress.
yeah, you digress. And now we've got, I don't know, we can talk about this in many states. I live in Arizona, so I will talk about it here. Sort of much to everybody's surprise, the governor here had been Ducey, who is a Republican, had sort of been listening to science at least a little bit. And in fact, there was a group at Arizona State and U of A that was doing serious modeling and so on and so forth. And Ducey had announced, okay, he was going to extend the lockdown through at least a substantial fraction of May and so on and so forth. And then Trump came and visited a few days ago. And in fact, you may have seen it. He visited a factory that was making masks and didn't wear a mask.
Didn't wear a mask.
Yeah. The funny thing about that is that somebody who was completely brilliant had music blaring in the background. And for a part of this, the song that was blaring in the background was Live and Let Die.
Did they sack the person responsible for the entertainment at this factory? I wonder.
I don't know. I mean, I have read articles talking about this, asking, okay, there are two possibilities. One is that there was somebody who was just brilliant. And the other is that Trump is just trying out his 2020 campaign slogan.
Mm.
You know, live and let die. Fine. Why not?
I think, Paul McCartney would go after our president in that
Probably.
case.
Probably.
Song,
Yeah. But anyway, after Trump came and visited, Ducey did the obvious thing. He announced that he no longer needed the group at the two universities that had been working on modeling COVID for Arizona. And not only did he not need them, but he restricted their access to the data that they were using. And so it really is a matter of, no, we don't like what these damn scientists are saying about this. And so we had better do everything that we can to shut down the scientists. And of course, this is the same time when they're talking about shutting down the national COVID response team, as if there ever were a national COVID response. I mean, there wasn't. Anyway, so that's kind of where we are. So another thing that did happen this week that I'm interested in your guys' thoughts about. We have been seeing now for a long time a set of models of what COVID was supposed to do out of a place, the IHME, which I think is the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation or something like that, out of the University of Washington. And this was the model that had been paraded out in front of everybody from the podium in the White House, saying that, well, okay, it's going to get kind of bad and that it's all going to taper off and that we're only going to have 60,000 deaths and so on and so forth. What are we up to today?
Just about to pass 75,000 today.
75,000. Yeah.
United States. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so it was finally at the first of this week that the IHME came out and said, well, sorry about that, folks, but we kind of screwed up. And they talked about why they screwed up. And they weren't quite as upfront as they might have been. We can talk about that. But they're now predicting by the end of May, I think somewhere between, I think their median prediction is now up at somewhere around 140,000, not by the end of May, by the end of the summer, I think. And even there, they're still assuming that somehow we're going to keep lockdowns in place through the summer and so on and so forth. So tell me about modeling. Allison, I astrophysicist. What's your acquaintance with the way that models like these work?
Well, I mean, there's several different ways, but essentially what you're doing is you're taking generally equations, which is where that whole math part comes in, but you're taking the way that you expect things to go based on, physical laws or assumptions a lot of times. So in this case, it would be something like we are assuming what communities are going to do to, reduce transmission or, and the kind of effect that this is going to have and the number of people that we expect to follow these rules, for example. And you make a projection based on kind of that behavior that you're expecting. So, and I mean, there are a lot of different ways you can do it, but that's what most of these models, to my understanding, are doing, are basically taking into account things like how transmissible is this disease, and how long is it, how long are you contagious and things like that, and then kind of mixing that together with how do we expect people to react to mitigate or not mitigate transmission, and then you can project based on that how many people you expect to get infected and how many people you expect to die. And that's why there's a number of models, because there are a number of ways to do that. Not to get too technical, but that's essentially what each of these models is doing, is taking into account the way that you think things are going to happen and predicting the future based on that.
Although it was kind of interesting because the IHME model, and it was kind of funny because you saw this was the model that was always held up as saying, oh, look, it's going to get better much faster and it's going to drop off, and so we can open up and so on and so forth. That model actually, it underpredicted all of the other models, and it was also kind of originally the worst of the models out there because it didn't really do any modeling. It was actually just a curve fitting program. They said, okay, this is what happened in Wuhan. And for those who don't know, in Wuhan, what happened is this thing started to happen and they shut things down. They said, you shall not come out of your house. You shall not leave the city. You shall not drive your car. You shall not do anything. And so what the IHME was doing originally was they were looking at our numbers, and they were kind of fitting our numbers to the front end of what happened in Wuhan, which kind of made sense because things went at the first there and they went at the first here. But then they assumed that in the United States, we were going to do that same kind of lockdown. And they said, oh, this is what's going to happen. And we'll only have 60,000 deaths. And then, of course, we didn't do that lockdown at all. And it took them a long time to finally admit that they were completely out of bed with reality. And they finally came out with different, much more sophisticated models. They're still assuming, if you look at their models, they're still assuming that that as things get bad, lockdowns will be put back into place. And so if you look at their models, you see their models go up and then start to taper off again and drop. And they're again projecting something like 140,000 deaths or something like that by the end of the summer.
134,475 by August 4th.
Ha! There you go.
I have it open.
Fantastic. But the assumption that goes into that is that as things get bad, we're going to close down again.
Right. And I think a lot of these models do assume that, which again, may or may not reflect reality.
Yeah, indeed. So anyway, a thing that I think is interesting, and this goes to why we're a bunch of astronomers, astrophysicists sitting here talking about this stuff. When's the first time you ran into some kind of a big computational model like this?
Probably nothing this complicated for a very long time. I mean, as an undergraduate, I took several classes, a lot of remote observing, a lot of actual observing, both of which involve modeling. For actual observing, you're modeling how your telescope, sees light. Sometimes you're modeling, what you're looking through, that to like dust and, gas that changes the light you're receiving. I also took a lot of kind of I was Earth atmospheric planetary science major for most of my undergraduate career until I switched to physics because it was basically the same thing and I thought it sounded better for some reason. But it was basically the same. But I took a lot of, atmospheric, things, which again comes back to weather, predicting hurricanes, you predict. And so I specifically remember working with models that predicted how a hurricane would behave when it hit land, for example. And so those were kind of some of the more sophisticated models I kind of started working with anyway. It was one of the first ones that I remember. But again, you can see general trends, usually when a hurricane hits land, it's gonna, die down after a couple days. But again, small changes in, where it hits and when it hits and how powerful it was when it hit would change things significantly. So again, it kind of comes back to that whole, not necessarily chaos, but a little bit of, you can change things very slightly and it's going to change. And so I think that's why there are so many models for COVID, for example. You can change what percentage of people, die from this, or how transmissible is this disease? Do you give it to 2 other people? Do you give it to 3 other people? Do you give it to 4 other people? And things like that are going to change the prediction significantly.
Yeah, it's one of the frustrations, of course, is that we have done so little testing. We have put so little effort into actually characterizing the disease, that one of the main sources of uncertainty in the modeling is we just haven't bothered to ask the question of how is this disease actually behaving itself,
Mhm.
which is kind of absurd. I mean, the thing that in astrophysics, I think about things that I've done. I have worked with large scale models of supernova explosions, and I've worked with large scale models of interstellar shock waves and radiative transfer in the interstellar medium, and of course people who do models of the expansion of the cosmos and all of those kinds of things. And so I have had my hands, technically I have had my hands in a fair bit of modeling over the years. And kind of an interesting thing, maybe a thing that people don't understand, is that math, as you said, math is math is math. The techniques that are used to model the cosmos, the techniques that are used to model radiative transfer in Earth's atmosphere and climate, the techniques that are used to model the pandemics, are all the same numerical techniques. You look at the code, and the code is very familiar regardless, because what you're doing is you are solving differential equations. You're solving equations that essentially say, okay, this is how things are going to change. All right, Newton's laws, if I push on something, it's going to accelerate. Or in the case of climate, that if there's an imbalance between incoming and outgoing radiation, then the heat content is going to change. Or in the case of COVID, okay, if people are moving around in the following way, then you expect the transmissions to be such and such. And so what these models are really all about ultimately is saying we have an understanding of how things change, but we then have to figure out how to take those changes and sum them up. We have to figure out how to add them up. And so, and a lot of it then is the question of what can you believe in terms of predictions and what can you not believe in terms of predictions.
Well, it's also why your uncertainties get much larger as it goes out. If you look at a lot of these models, they do actually show the uncertainty, and it kind of blows up the longer it goes, because the farther out in time you're talking, the less you know about what we're going to do, what measures are going to go into place.
Yeah,
so they can't predict it as accurately.
There's so many variables that are changing every day as well. And I mean, now we have, let me ask you this, doesn't it scare you guys? This business, I mean, a bunch of states, a lot of states, at least in limited ways, are opening things now or Monday. I mean, this swing and the exposure, and basically nobody's been tested. What, 1/3 of 1% of the population has been tested here. This is now this experiment, the door is open, it's beginning. What are we going to see about 3 to 4 weeks from now, given the incubation period? And what do we not know? Jeff, you mentioned this again a little while ago. Now there's this business in New York of a mysterious complication of the disease affecting very young children, with terrible heart murmurs, rashes, and fatal heart attacks. And what is going on here? Nobody understands this dynamic yet. Basically, nobody has been tested. We're now in a free fall experiment. We already have, by a factor of 4 or greater, the most fatalities in the world of any national. Now the door is open. Doesn't it frighten you what may happen, in the next 4 to 8 weeks? At least in some of these places.
Run with it, Allison. I have to breathe for a minute before I give my answer to that
Right.
question.
I mean,
You know,
yes.
I don't want to I don't want to screw up a broadcast by finding heavy objects and starting to throw them at pictures on the wall or whatever. Anyway,
I mean, we've been
Yeah.
talking for a long while about,
Mhm.
what if things start to open up and people are out there and they're exchanging air and droplets again? It's not a what if anymore. This is
no,
Right.
no. You know, the heck of it, but the heck of it is, and this is the thing that you know, maybe for the people who've been listening to us for as long as we've actually been doing the show, will have heard, but we were talking about this stuff substantially before that.
Mhm.
And what has happened, if you actually understood the dynamics of the equations, if you understood the math, and if you went and looked at the modeling that had been done, you know, back in as early as very early March, what's happening now was predicted. There's nothing that's happening now that we didn't know was going to happen. Said if you do not do anything about it, then this is what it's going to look like. And we're not really doing anything about it. And by golly, that's what it's looking like. And so there are no surprises here.
Mhm.
I mean, they're not like the IHME models, not that it matters because it was easy to do, but I actually wrote an article a few weeks ago saying they sure like these IHME models, but they are clearly wrong for the following 12 reasons. And you can see it in the data, and probably by about the end of April, they're going to have to admit that they're lousy. And I wish that I had gotten somebody to bet me on that prediction. But again, it wasn't a hard prediction to make. If you just looked at it, it was obvious.
Mhm.
So, and I interrupted you, Allison.
No, I mean,
yeah.
it's just, again, I see the way, I think there's kind of two sides of it, because on the one side, yeah, it's not good. I mean, opening is going to cause a lot more problems. I don't know how related this is, but I just thought of it, so I'm going to say it anyway. I have noticed, just kind of poking around online, a lot of places like Disney and Hot Topic and Box Lunch and a lot of these places that I happen to shop at, that are obviously geared towards, younger individuals, are selling masks, are selling kind of these fashion masks, like,
Mhm.
kind of clearly with the idea that these are going to be with us for some time, which I
Mhm.
actually think is kind of a positive move in a way,
Mhm.
because they're saying, yes, you're going to have to wear a mask. We're going to make them available. Here's a fun one that you can wear so that, when you need to have 5 or 6 different masks to rotate,
Mhm.
because you probably will, because this is going to be with us for months, this is an easy way to do it, which I think is kind of cool.
Mhm.
I'm kind of glad to see that response in a way.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think it's kind of, again, a dichotomy. There are clearly multiple groups. I mean, if Wisconsin were to open up tomorrow, I still wouldn't go to the store more than I had to, and I think there are a lot of people that are that way. I mean, clearly there are the
Mhm.
people that are either already going to the store or that will, go out and get their haircut immediately after things open. But hopefully there are at least a number of people that realize that this is premature and that they really shouldn't change their habits just yet. So
Yeah.
it's definitely frightening, because
Yeah.
you're leaving it up to people a little bit more,
Mhm.
which again, at a time like this, maybe isn't the wisest thing to do, but at least I think some people are still going to
Yeah.
observe
In fact,
the
it's
way of
kind of
life.
it's interesting if you look at the models. An interesting set of models are coming out of Columbia University, and if you look at their models, one of the parameters in their models is exactly that. That okay, how will people change their behavior,
Mhm.
and how will people change their behavior? Like same thing in the IHME models. Their new models still assume that people are that there will be behavioral changes, except they assume that those behavioral changes will happen as people actually see how bad this thing is getting and come to realize that it's something that they need to worry about personally.
Mhm.
Sweden is an interesting case. The Sweden has been a little bit of a darling of the right-wing media. Oh, look at that. They didn't have any lockdowns and it was all okay, and so on and so forth. I heard the director of the World Health Organization the other day talking about Sweden as an example of what a good response looks like. Because what happened in Sweden is, instead of saying, okay, we have to force you to lock down because we know you're too irresponsible to behave reasonably if we don't force you to. What happened in Sweden was they said, okay, this is what responsible behavior looks like. And for the most part, people have behaved pretty responsibly.
Mhm.
Because in Sweden, I think they do tend to believe in science,
Right.
by and large.
Well, and in a lot of countries in that region, in Finland, in you know, they have, you know, prisons even. I mean, look at an extreme example where you're not really forcibly, where the people are there to rehabilitate, and the guards don't have any guns. The guards are there to help them out. They have an intelligent, constructive idea of what the behavior should be for the group as a whole. It's not, I'm going to get what I need to get for me, and the rest of you can go to hell, you know. It's there's a community group feeling among the population, even such that prisoners basically voluntarily are in there to rehabilitate their behavior. And you know, they don't need to be forced to do things. This is a very different dynamic psychologically in a lot of other
Crazy.
countries in this
Yeah.
world than Americans typically have.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's, again, you would hope that if you just came out and said, look, this is not difficult to understand, that we are in a situation here where every time you have an encounter with someone, then there is the risk of transmission in that encounter. You know, if you have it and don't know it, you might transmit it that way. If they have it and you don't know it, then, you know, you get it. And the bottom line is, going back to that whole modeling business, the one thing that is just really easy to predict, you know, that just everybody agrees on is that the more chances for this thing to spread, the faster the spread is going to be. And again, that's what's happening. Just a quick tangent. New York Times did a thing the other day that was very interesting. And that is, they took the national numbers. And right now, if you look at it, the national numbers of cases appear to have kind of gone up and leveled off. And, you know, they're not falling. You know, it's nothing like okay, we're over it, but okay, at least they're not going up so much. Until you go in and say, well, actually, New York got hit first and hardest and clamped down on things. So what happens if you just subtract New York out of the rest of the country and ask what's going on in the United States if you just ignore the state of New York? And the answer is, you look at the rest of the United States and it's just, you know, we're cruising. And I've not done it. I enjoy playing around with data just for the heck of playing around with data. And you can get all of these data online if you poke around a little bit. And I have been thinking that it might be fun to go back and just remove New York entirely from the United States numbers, and then run the United States numbers on this thing from the get-go. Because New York completely dominated the numbers for so long. The fact that now New York is tapering off hides the fact that the rest of the country, the numbers are skyrocketing. You know, and I think it would be interesting to go back and do that, just to see what that looks like. Because, you know, again, you look at it, I saw today that the state of Texas now is up to 1,000 new reported cases, or over 1,000 new reported cases every day for the last several days. You know, the United States is, anyway, you get the idea.
I'm a little fascinated by this idea of sort of lack of rationality in the United States compared with a lot of other first world regions in the world. What do you guys think of it? Are there more? Let me ask you this: why are there some regions that have more purveyors of magical thinking than others in this world?
Are you sure you want to go there, Dave?
Okay, I'll carry on, just the two of you.
I hate to say it. Boy, this would be interesting. Should I say it out loud?
Ooh, careful.
Careful. No, I won't
Great
say it
question.
out loud. Okay. But I suspect that one could choose a particular book or two
Hmm.
and look at the concentration of those books and what's happening with COVID, and you might find very interesting relationships. But no, it's and again, the modeling. You look at the models, and as a scientist, again, I modeling like this is neat. In fact, we were talking about this before, and I went and I pulled a few of the books off of my shelf that were technically technical books about doing this kind of modeling.
Mhm.
Sort of as an answer to anyone who might say, oh, you guys are astrophysicists, you shouldn't have opinions about things like pandemics. It's like, no. I know math. I know modeling. I know that kind of stuff. But it's the question I keep asking myself, and I have been asking myself all along, is how bad does it have to get before people finally just say, no, we're not going to do it. We're just not going to do it. I mean, an issue, in fact, looking at this, Jerry just chimed in with, I made the comment about getting data, and she chimed in and said, get the data now because there's a pretty good chance it's going to be restricted before too terribly long.
Mm.
I think that's not I think we are at the point that I do not put it past these guys, these people, to just try to hide the problem by not allowing us to know what the numbers are.
Well, wait a
Just
minute.
like we're already seeing, like I said in Arizona. They didn't just say, we're not going to support you guys for doing the modeling anymore. They said, we're not going to let you have the data anymore.
I'm kind of shocked. Allison, if you have a problem in the world, you can't just wish it away. Is that what you're saying?
I'm fairly sure that doesn't work, at least not in the long term. Clearly, we're finding out that in the short term, it appears to work, but again, that's a perfectly good question. And I think unfortunately the answer is it's not bad enough yet. I think
Really
that's still the
shock the
situation.
population as a
Yeah.
whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the United States is a very large country. And so, again, if we hear about something happening, for us in Wisconsin on probably either coast, it's not necessarily a concern. Maybe for Arizona, if you hear something happening in California, you're concerned, but something happening in New York sounds very far away because it is. I think what people tend to forget is how interconnected our country is. And again, how people travel and how they're used to moving around. And that changes things very quickly. But I think that's, again, why, whether it was right or wrong, and I think it was wrong, the United States took, the stance in the first place where this is a problem in China. We don't need to worry about it. It's very far away and it's never going to get here. Clearly that's not the case. And, again, I think a lot of the world kind of thought that at first and forgot how easy it is to get on a plane and go somewhere, which
well, no,
both good and bad.
That's a thing. If you look, the people had been looking at pandemics for a long time and understood full well that global mobility would make the next pandemic something that was
but understanding
different.
Something and actually acting on it are two very different things.
Well, yeah, but again, the whole point isn't the point of having a government in part is so that you have people who can rub 3 brain cells together at the same time, who can actually look at data and figure out what is happening and can act accordingly. If you look at this thing going all the way back to essentially the first of the year, it's now well documented that there was data streaming in to the US federal government, streaming into the White House saying, look, this thing has the makings of a major pandemic that if we do not get on top of it right now, we're going to have very serious problems. And the response was, oh, but Wall Street wouldn't like that. So I'm going to call it a hoax, and I'm going to call it just a little flu. And I'm going to say it's going to magic its way, magic itself away by April. And now we're being told it's going to magic itself away by, Memorial Day or whatever. It isn't the whole point of having a government is so that the government can actually spot those kinds of things and bring the right expertise to bear and coordinate responses and do what needs to be done so that you don't wind up having hundreds of thousands of people dying needlessly. And so you don't wind up having to make choices between whether people can work or whether people can live. I'll tell you the thing that's going to be interesting. Schools are a really huge deal because they realize, okay, we can't really have everybody go back to work until there's childcare, and schools provide childcare. Oh, we'd better open schools. We'd better open schools. Right now, courtesy of the fact that we don't pay teachers worth shit, and that they don't get an awful lot of respect and so on and so forth, there is a huge teacher shortage right now.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife is an elementary school principal. I know this firsthand because I see the challenge that she has trying to find good teachers. And a great many of those teachers are older. They are in categories that if they get this thing, they're in the categories that are going to die, which means there's going to be some very substantial fraction of teachers who are told you have to go back into the classroom now. And they're going to respond to that with a one-fingered salute. And so it would not surprise me if one of the places where this thing finally breaks, where people finally start to stand up and say, no, I am not cannon fodder, is going to be when they try to force teachers back into the classroom and teachers just won't go. And right now, I think that I'm kind of pulling this number out of my ass, and I apologize for that. But I think probably right now, if maybe 15% of teachers, at least in this area, said we will not go back into the classroom, it would be physically impossible to open schools.
Mm.
And I don't know that 15% is exactly the right number, but it's probably not too terribly different from that. So, yeah, you get maybe 1 out of 5 teachers saying, I'm not going to die so that people can go back to work, and the system's broken.
We don't know yet what's going to happen in the next 2 months.
Right.
But sitting here right now, we have almost no one tested. We're a long way from a vaccine, as far as we know. How is there going to be a normal resumption of the normal school year in September this year?
You can without it being catastrophic. Maybe
Yeah.
it'll be, again, it might be fine for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then you're going to have this wave. And I mean, especially because, again, there's this question, and a lot of headlines I've been seeing have been about, children as asymptomatic carriers.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you get so, I mean, there's two parts of it. One is that, and again, this may be old news, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I had read something a while ago now about how in, say, Wuhan, again, I think I was thinking this when you were mentioning fitting that curve, children weren't getting as sick, or, they weren't really, considered, they weren't even sure that they got it. And in America, that's clearly not the case. Whether it's mutated or whether there's something completely else going on, children are clearly carrying it. They're getting sick. Some of them are getting extremely sick, as we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's part of it, which is that they could either get sick themselves or they could carry it to everyone. You're just going to see this huge explosion once you get them all together.
In fact, a thing that people worry about is it's known with influenza, for example, that schools are breeding grounds. And it's obvious if you've ever spent any time in an elementary school classroom,
I mean, high
kids
school
are
classroom, come on.
or any exactly.
There's a
Kids are
continuous set of infections going around, depending
yeah,
on the
yeah,
kid group. It's nonstop.
yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, they're petri dishes, and
Mhm.
it's known that they're petri dishes, and it's known, schools are understood, for example, to be a major source of transmission during the flu season.
Mhm.
And those and you can get into the literature, and there's plenty to support that.
Sure.
And it's interesting, there's also data out of the oh now, I forget the name of the center, but it's the group at Imperial College London
Mm.
that is one of the premier modeling groups in the world. And as Europe was responding, various kinds of responses, what this group was able to do was go in and look and say, okay, here was closing schools, or here was shutting things down, or whatever, and then see the response to that. And they looked at it, and I believe second to just shutting everything down, they found that school closures were probably the most important thing that you could do in terms of in these terms.
Mhm.
And so that happens. The thing is, though, is that when you look at flu, kids get the flu, and they get it quickly, and they get it. And so you have a kid come down with the flu, and within a very short period of time of exposure, then that kid's out of the classroom.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Here you've got a situation where you've got kids, most of whom are going to be asymptomatic. There's every reason to imagine that they're going to be contagious for, a period of several weeks.
Yeah.
And then you put that into a classroom setting, and it's, okay, the caveat is always, all right, I may not be I may not be an epidemiologist, but I know the math, and I know what that's got to do to the number of opportunities for transmission.
The identification of the
Mhm.
disease is much, much more complicated and
Mhm.
disguised.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not as straightforward as something like the flu or a cold.
no,
Right.
no.
But thankfully, we will have much more to resolve on Monday.
I don't think we're gonna have to start some pools, I think. When is the first time that some large group of people is going to stand up and simply say, no, we will not do this thing?
Mm.
Or when is it that we're going to start to see, instead of these lunatics with their rifles? Oh God, I saw, what was it? I wish I could remember the actual limerick, but a little limerick about Trumpsters showing up in state houses carrying rifles, and then they all managed to leave, and they were alive when they left, and that's how you knew they were Caucasian. uh I want to be there in one of these states if you get a large crowd of blacks and Mexicans that show up at the door to a state capitol building carrying AK-47s and push in. I want to see what happens in that event. It won't be pretty. So there's that aspect of it as well, and that's a serious aspect of it, because the socioeconomic status has a tremendous impact on your access to health
Mhm.
care, has a tremendous impact on your access to quality food and things like that. It has a tremendous access, or a tremendous impact on your ability to isolate You know, you look at a situation where you've got a large number of people who are in a small area, you know, in a crowded apartment complex, or you know, that kind of a situation, and they don't have any economic buffer, which means that right now the only way they can feed their kids is they've got to go to work, and you know, their kids have no place, so they're outside playing. And you put all of that together and you say, gee, this has got to be hitting those communities much harder. And sure enough, you go and look through the South, for example, and you know, it's the African American communities, the Black communities, that are really taking it on the chin in this thing, just because their circumstances are such that they cannot protect themselves from it. And yeah, if we are really at the point where we can allow hundreds of thousands of people to die, and where we can be fine with the idea that if you happen to be in a low socioeconomic group, then it just doesn't really matter if your chance of dying is much higher, and that people who have huge sums of money and are sitting quite comfortably inside of their houses, certainly not exposing themselves to anybody else, are the ones who are behind pushing these movements to, oh, go out there and protest about my freedom to get a haircut is more important than your life, protests like we're having. Is that really the country that we live in now? Or is eventually that going to stop?
I have a closing thought with regard to that. We opened talking about Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Franklin. Let's hope that some people who are in influential positions in this country are also familiar with those documents that they produced and what they really meant. There's something that we could aim for.
Oh, hang on for 1 second. Yes,
we're coming up
Ms.
on 50
Reed,
minutes here.
you were going to tell us the whole limerick. Tell us the whole limerick if you've got it off the top of your head. Hopefully she will hear us. There's a little bit of a delay, so it'll take a second. But the thing starts with some folk of the MAGA persuasion. Yeah, it'll pop up in a minute. So I was gonna say, while we're waiting for that to pop up, which hopefully it will. Should we start a pool or 2 or 3 or 10 about when certain things are going to start snapping and how they're going to start snapping, and what are going to be the groups that you know, give the one-fingered salute first, or if anyone will do that? Yeah, do we want to start do we want to start making wild speculations about such things just for the heck of it?
Depends on whether you're a betting person or not. Here you go. She's got the full.
Yeah, there we go.
There, yeah.
Go ahead, Allison, take it away.
Don't make me do it.
Okay, I will
Yeah,
do it.
Click over the window.
Some folk of the MAGA persuasion engaged in a state house invasion. Though heavily armed, they all left unharmed, and that's how you know they're Caucasian. Too true. Too true. All right, are we through until?
I think that's a good stopping point.
I think that's a good stopping point. We will see people on Monday. Be sure, and you know, we are enjoying getting comments from people, and be sure we're going to be on, at least for a while, Monday afternoons and Thursday afternoons until we get tired of it, and then we'll probably go to 1 day a week. But for the time being, at least, we're here on Mondays and Thursdays. Spread the word if you enjoy the conversation. I'd like to think that what we're saying is something that probably ought to be heard. Anyway.
Have a great weekend.
Yep.
Have a great weekend.
Take care. Be safe, everyone.